Hello, Daniela. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having this Q&A with us. It was just so amazing to see you on screen and how much knowledge and literally how good you are at talking. And no, literally, because there's so many moments that I had to write down. I have like a notebook full of notes and quotes that you said because it was like so good and like there's so much to take away from what you have said in the movie. So yeah, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for inviting me, and it is truly an honor to be here with you all tonight and to have shared my story and to be so well received by so many different people from all different walks of life. So it's truly an honor to be on this journey with everyone as we're all fighting and learning and growing so that way we can be of more service towards trans liberation. So thank you for just showing up.
Yes. And just before like starting with the questions that I have for you, I just wanted to point out, like, first of all, the director, D. Smith, did an amazing job at combining, in my opinion, knowledge and just unapologetic and just true, uncensored dialogue, not
Mm-hmm.
only from trans women, but from men, but also adding that artistic touch to the movie, which makes it so appealing to watch and makes it like so, oh my God, what's the next story? What's the next thing that's gonna happen? You know, and you're always like kind of like, what is gonna happen next and what is gonna be said. So already I just wanted to point out that that was just a fabulous work. Also, I know it was said, but I just really want to point out, like, rest in peace and let's send our prayers to Coco the doll, because it is so sad to like have learned that after, you know, watching the movie. I learned after actually watching the movie that that happened, and it was really, I feel like she got robbed from so many things that she could have been saying, but I was also glad that this was recorded and we could have part of like her message to the world. So that's something I wanted to say from the jump.
While it's very unfortunate that we've lost Coco, that is such a common reality, right? And I remember when she first passed, so many people said, "I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine how you must feel." And the first thought I had was, well, this isn't the first time I've had to sit with this feeling. I am just honored and will never ever forget the moments that I shared with Coco in person, but what an honor it was to be a part of her journey and her story, right? And to just be a part of that Kokomo City family, because what we know is that there was enough visibility to fight for justice for Coco, but there are so many Cocos who are still considered cold cases. And so I am happy that the violence in which we experienced got a certain level of visibility, that hopefully we have more comrades in this fight with us, right? That people are going to start employing us more, that people are going to start advocating for our safety more, that we won't be the issue that's just okay when we're having conversation about DE and I, that we're beyond the checkbox at this point. And I hope that anybody who's in a position to do something to save a Black trans life, I hope that Coco's a reminder that we all need you in this fight with us. You know, it's one day it's Coco, and the next day it'll be another one of my sisters. But thank you all for understanding and being willing again to hear our stories, because it's all too common for us. But we're still fighting and still remaining resilient.
Yes, and there's something that you said that's so important, and I think it's like continuing the fight, you know what I mean? And it I was going to start with another question, but I think it's bringing me right to the topic. And it's like, you mentioned, you know, how ironic sometimes it was that you're, you know, we're going to be at a protest, or a trans girl is at a protest, and then it's like right back to, you know, what it is. And that sometimes hypocrisy within even like activist spaces, where the people that don't necessarily experience that is like, oh yeah, you're strong, girl. Oh yeah, like this, that. And kind of like downplay the situation, and almost sometimes even like idolize or kind of like glamorize or talk about it like a story in a book versus
Mm-hmm.
someone's actual life. You know what I mean? And
Right.
when you said that, my question to you was really like, how can we shift sometimes the energy of just talking and like more towards actions and like, you know, on the bigger picture, because it's amazing to see in this generation how many sometimes crowdfund things there are on the internet and like how people talk. But at the same times, like you said, it's like the girls are going back to what it is and are still in the situations of danger. So how can we tackle that as a community in a way?
So I think collective liberation is important, but I think it's also to understand your capacity. So I think sometimes people reach a certain capacity and they feel burnt out, or they feel like, this isn't necessarily my fight, or I don't have enough language to insert myself into the conversation. But I think something that social media has done, or local organizations are great at, is giving you access to people who are directly impacted, right? And so what it should look like is that not you put so much pressure on yourself to say that you have to have the language to enter in this space, that you have to have someone in your circle, in your immediate circles, to be a part of the fight. It is just understanding that this is a marginalized individual who experiences oppression in a certain way, where maybe they didn't have access to quality education, right? They don't have access to employment opportunities. And so when you are that person who holds a position of power or influence, or in no shape or form is your reality going to be threatened by speaking up. And what I mean by that, it's not, demanding, oh, let's include more trans people, let's do this for the trans community in a performative way, but in a more intentional way, by saying like, okay, we know that they've lacked access to employment. So what does building out a career development program looks like for us, right? What does it look like as a community providing the tools that systemically this community struggles to get access to? So it's, if they can't be their own voice in the healthcare space, then can you be that for them within educational opportunities and employment and so forth? Because I think so many people are expecting us to live life beyond mere survival, but nobody's really advocating for us to get access to a quality of life, right? So like after you've watched Kokomo City, you have to ask yourself, is just a great story, or how can we start making sure we're hiring more Black trans people, right? Or trans people in general. Like when you think about healthcare, your ability to go to the doctor is not something that may be a reality for somebody who's trans. So how can you be their advocate in that space? And I think it's building an alliance that says, it's okay sometimes to walk into it shamelessly ignorant, Like I think that's the concern these days. Everything feels so polarizing and so tribal that it's like, if I don't get it right from the door, then I'm a part of the problem. And that's not the truth, right? This is a complex conversation, and it takes people who are willing to be patient and empathetic towards us, right? Because what you expect us to know and to do is not necessarily the reality for so many of us. And so I want us to all find ways to build community with each other, then focus on what feels like being called out in order to do it, right? Let's find ways to invite one another in so we can build community outwardly. And it gives us a real understanding. So that way we're not falling through the cracks, right? Because we're in the community, we're learning from that community to understand that community's needs.
So much was said, and like so much was said. I mean, from just creating like sustainable resources to like, also giving us that grace of you don't know everything from the jump, and we cannot judge people for not necessarily knowing stuff or whatever, and really kind of letting the grace for people to learn. I love that message. And speaking about messages, I feel like especially Black trans women, there's a lot of always having to either, teach people, which is very respectable, to hear, all the things that you have done just before you hopped on, for the interview was so wow. Like, you know what I mean? Like there is so much that you have done with so many like powerful people, and that literally makes you such a powerful voice in the community. And even when it comes to sex work, the working dolls know that it's a mental game of chasing the bag, and there's an addiction to money that comes with that, right? Where you're chasing the bag, another text, and there's not that many girls for the amount of chaser there is out there in the world, right? There's not
Yeah.
enough. And it's like in both cases, it's like giving, 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 right? And it's like and it can, you can lose yourself in that because it's like either the money, either explaining, trying to have to constantly explain yourself. Where for you at least, or how would you, however you want to answer, like, what do you think is the best way to centering back to yourself sometimes and having a moment where it's like, yo, no phone, no client, or no activism right now. Like, it's about me. And like, what do you do, or what do you, recommend people to do in those moments? Like,
No, for one. So for sure. Sorry, excuse not for one. So I was gonna say for sure and then for one. So I am not an active sex worker anymore. I'm actually married now. And I feel very blessed to be at this place in my life, but I think I've always prioritized what was life outside of survival, right? And I think because of where I live in New York City, you get access to so many different types of trans women. And what I mean by different types is you see the established trans women, you see the trans women still in survival. And so having so many different examples for me, I knew that, from the day that I saw Janet Mogg on the cover of Marie Claire, that I finally had the representation that I needed to see what life was outside of survival. And one would say, you were so crazy to just reach out to this famous person on the cover of a magazine. How many people will really be able to connect and meet them? But what I knew is that there was that commonality of just us both being Black and trans, right? Which meant that if everything that she stood on, that she said she represented, I am that person and I'm deserving of that relationship. And so I say all of that to say is that when I started to realize that I wasn't the problem, right? That there were people in society refusing to understand and educate themselves about people like me. And so that I needed to ensure that I had a quality living, right? And so I've always said this to my girlfriends, and maybe it resonates with some people, maybe it don't. But I've always said, before you become a judge, right, you have to wake up every single day and say, I'm that judge. If you want to be a model, you have to wake up every day and say, I'm a model, right? Some people are like, well, even if you don't have the looks, how can you say that? But it's about believing in yourself. And I believe that I was deserving more than survival. So if I had to, oh, trust and believe, I'm having the fabulous lunch, okay, at the fabulous place in the city, and I'm going to live my best life. I may go back to my hood, I may go back to my reality, but I'm showing that those people, even in that space, that I'm deserving to be in it. I'm telling myself that I deserve a quality life. And to go beyond materialistic things, for me, spiritually, I've had to do things that I always condition myself to believe that trans women couldn't do. So it's like, if I'm not going to just go play tennis, will I go run for a few, But I knew ultimately the investment outside of the survival was going to make me who I was. Because, like you just said, right? Like at every dawning minute, it's is this the next client? How much money am I going to get? Where's my next survival going to come from? Right. And I will say I was lucky because I guess I've always been chatty. So, I've met clients who would see my potential, right? And then invest in that. And I stopped being the girl who would want to get money for a Chanel bag, right? And I wanted it for my education. I would stop demanding how to sustain survival and get to a place of thriving and living. And I think whatever that looks like for anybody, especially those who are trans identified or may have engaged in survival work or still do, I want you to know that it is so important to find life beyond survival, right? That is a moment in your life, but it is going to take not only the self conviction of believing that you are more than that, but it is calling people out. It is going to that local organization and saying, hey, I need more support than what you've been offering. And if they're at capacity, then find the next organization. But for me, it was important to build the community that wanted to see me thriving, not talked about me thriving.
round of applause, because yes. Um, and yeah, like what you just said about not always staying in survival, I think at the end of the day, like you said something so important that I think I really relate on. And it's like sometimes taking yourself out of that mental low energy that is put on you, right? Like that's after conditioning and brainwashing. And it's like you have to take yourself out, and it's very hard to do that. And one thing, like, and I would say that it's a little bit in our culture, but it's really not, the girls' fault. But you mentioned, in the documentary, you were in the bath, and I think you were explaining that, oh girl, yeah, chase the bag, and it's like we don't think about the emotional toll or about like really,
Mm-hmm.
the sense of self. And I just think what you just said, that message really kind of like even adds on to that point of like, kind of like, you can do it, girl. Sometimes you do have to survive, but forget that this can be temporary, or, that whatever it is that you want to do in life, you can do it. You know what I mean? And I
Of
think
course.
that's a very strong message.
And I tell all the girls, it's unfortunate, but it's okay. But we can get past this moment in our life. And if you can, and if you have the tools to do it, try to invest your money. Try to develop a craft, right? That it takes nothing of you. Like I know a lot of the old school girls, right? Like they would do sex work, by night, but they were in school, right? Building the tools that they needed to at some point integrate themselves into what people call regular or normal society. And what I mean by that is not saying that what we're doing isn't normal, because sex work is real work. But I'm sorry, as somebody who experienced abandonment all too well, to me, sometimes when you're in sex work, that shows up a lot, right? Because here you have is this person who's coming in your life, providing you with these resources, and they're going to leave again. And they're going to leave you in that same reality. And like I said in the documentary, a lot of girls aren't getting the millionaire who's putting them up in the penthouse. They're getting the millionaire who's coming to meet them in the hood and leave them in the hood, right? So it's making sure, too, you understand in those interactions what he's there for and what are you accepting from him. So it's, if you want to accept those $5,000 dates or the 500 or wherever you may fall in the experience, are you investing only in survival? And that is a question only you can answer. Because I know that there's so many things systematically that has been done to us that have put us in those positions. But when are we going to hold ourselves accountable and know that we are deserving of more than that? Now, if that is your truth, that is your path, that is your life, I celebrate you, I honor you. But I truly, genuinely believe that we are so much more worth, we are worth so much more than that, right? But we don't know that, right? Because again, when you think about sex work compared to what your experience is, do I make $500 to $2,000 a day in my home where I experience safety? There's some risk to this, but I can think to myself that this is safety. Or do I go for a job and be misgendered? Do I go and potentially be physically assaulted in public space? So living in my shadow makes me feel safe. And why is it that as a community and as a culture, we haven't shifted that narrative? That being trans is okay in any space, let alone positioning them, to thrive beyond mere survival is okay. And it is not just their responsibility. It is all of our responsibility. It is, how do you move beyond transactional relationship? How do you know, like, to say like, F this job comes with transphobia. My income comes with drug usage, quick cash, and then I'm able to go and be fabulous. But the question for the person who's living in that lifestyle, is that fabulous? Can your life be more fabulous than that? And can it be a quality of life that doesn't need to feel transactional?
Yeah, because it's when you're so, especially for anyone, but especially for the young girls that start, Dominique said, like, when she was starting at 19, she was working at the restaurant, shit is hard, whatever. And then you see the older girls, oh my God, like that money, the
Yeah.
surgery, this, that. And it's so easy to like, oh, I'm living the real cunt life, I'm this, that. And it's true, to a certain extent, you are, baby. But it's true that we can get blinded. And I think you like explained it fabulously.
But
And it brought me to my, oh, yes, I'll
sorry,
let you.
is that it's glamorous because you feel like you can sit next to Katie, Karen, and Bob
Mm.
of wealth and establishments. But just understand too that no matter whatever you're chasing, and a lot of times, and I hate to say this, but it's whatever we say, like within one of the colloquialisms in our community, right? Anytime we see something that's perceived of class, what's the first thing we all say? Oh, that's white woman. As soon as we see, a girl with the fabulous things of like the Chanel bag, the designer clothes, oh, you white woman. We've now told ourselves that only white women can access luxury. right? And that only white women are deserving of it. And so, yeah, when I think about my community, the Black trans community, we have to understand that Black trans women can be successful, and we don't need to depend on the white man to provide it, even after he decides to leave the Katie and the Barbara Anns and all the girls, while he's getting his monkey flipped. But, and I say that to say, it's like, we can all do more. And even as a sister, a trans sister, I can do more. And it started with what I was trying to do in Kokomo City, that I cannot tell you this is a rites of passage anymore. This isn't the right way to do it. There's more community and more opportunities, but we have to hold people accountable. And you got to ask people, are you here with intention for your impact? Or are you here to be performative for your impact? And that's okay for some people. But let's move beyond being performative and let's get back to being intentional.
Actually, you segued perfectly to my last question from me. You talked about, finding our own house. Like Black trans women, one, in the Black community have, always been kind of like, you know, attacked in different ways. Then it's like in the trans community, like I think it's no shade, but it's like we cannot depend on the other girls. We cannot depend on the white girls. We cannot depend on whatever, because at the end of the day, in every situation, personally, it's been left a lot of the time, Black girls have to stick together. You know what I mean? And you talked about the Madam C.J. Walker and like seeing liberated women in general. But if we take that back to really, and that's, a girls' conversation, the girls, but like if we take it
Oh,
to really our house, because we have a history of literally doing houses, right? But back
mhm.
then it was such a different world. And now that we're in a world where you're saying we can redefine our culture, it doesn't need to be a rite of passage. If that is your truth, power to you. But we can redefine culture. How can we have the liberated trans women, right? And not repeat that kind of thing where, okay, now I'm liberated, let me just go hide and I don't want to even like look at my past anymore. Yes, there's accountability, but like how can we build that house for ourselves? Like, and even financially, like, and I know there's not a clear answer because it's such a big question.
No, great.
But yeah.
I mean, so what I will say is that, what does it look like for me? So I think, like, as you heard, like my bio being read, and there was a list of incredible things that I have done, right? You wouldn't have known that if you only knew me up from Kokomo City, right? How many people will genuinely be interested in, following me or the other protagonists in the film rather than celebrate the filmmaker, which she deserves every bit of the flowers. She deserves every accolade that comes with it, because this is a remarkable narrative, right? But what I think about for me is that, to some extent, I could have easily been the forgotten girl while another girl rose to fame and success, right? And what I've always prioritized was, who was the person in the room that really saw me? Who was the person that was interested in helping me gain access to employment opportunities? Who are people that I know that, whether it's me on a red carpet or I'm in my darkest moment in a very personal time, that I can go to? Because I know that what I need to sustain my life beyond mere survival is not someone who expects me to show up only in the token capacity, only when me showing my face makes you look good, within different social groups. And I promise you, I have gotten the people who says, "Oh, girl, stay in touch. I'm gonna make sure I show up in your life, and I'm gonna support you to the end." They were no longer accessible. It was a person who didn't have to tell me 2 to 3 times that they would be in my life and show up for me, that I lean on now. There was a CEO, and I don't want to go on too long, but I'll give you a few examples. There was a CEO and founder of an ad agency by the name of Aaron Duffy, special guest. He allowed me to understand not only what my path in the creative or ad agency world would look like, but he supported me through that. So he gave me a job at the agency. He allowed me to float around and work with other experts until I got to that place where I felt comfortable enough to say that I can be considered an expert in a position. When it came to me understanding what resources look like to sustain my platform, I was able to go to local organizations like GLAD Media, and I held this relationship with the chief communication officer, right? And I mean, no matter how busy he got, I made sure to stay present in his life, reminding him of who I was and what I was doing. Because I understand sometimes people in a position of power get so busy that sometimes their intention get lost, right? Where it's like, I want to show up for you, but I'm at capacity. And I say that to say that there's so many other people who are well off financially or not, but their commitment to my life, the commitment to elevating me beyond mere survival is what got me to the next opportunity, is what continues to make me believe that I'm deserving, but also the girls who are after me need me, right? Like what I know is that if somebody's not talking about it, if somebody's not doing it, if somebody's not willing to model it, then what do the girls have? What do my siblings have? Because a lot of times too, when we have this conversation, we talk about trans women, but let's not forget our trans brothers, our non-binary siblings, and also the men, the people, not just men, but the people who are loving us, right? They are on this journey with us, you know? And so right when you think that like, oh, the trans fight isn't your fight, or how can you show up and keep building? Remember, it may be your son. It may be one of your relatives who may be our lovers, and they need your support as much as we need your support, you know? But it's how do you take it from a place of centering it from your ideals to understanding that this other human needs you to see them, to celebrate them, and to love them, even in moments of discomfort, right? Like we all know that not everybody gonna walk into the world and like every single person. Like I'm here to let you know I don't like every goddamn body. I don't want everybody to like me because I know I'm not everybody's cup of tea. Okay. But I'm okay with though going in alliance and being a comrade too to other fights, because I know that when I'm joining somebody else and they're joining me, that we're working towards collective liberation, right? Which means that right when it's not the day for my rights, it might be women's rights, it might be gay rights, it might be disability rights. But what I know is that I'm a part of a community, and all of those people exist within that, and it's my responsibility as much as it's yours to ask yourself every single day when you wake up in a home, when you didn't have to suck a dick for your next meal, when you didn't have to question your relationship with your family simply because of who you are. That means you're starting out with 3 things more than the average trans person, which means that there's something in you that you can offer that the trans person next to you or you're in community with lack. And sometimes it's just giving them a hug and saying, you're going to be okay. I see you. I love you. Because that's sometimes all we need. We're already battling a world that wants to eradicate us or think they will. So can you be the one to give us the love when maybe it was times when our parents lacked? When community told us we didn't have the right to exist, can you be that person to let us know we're okay and we're deserving to exist within your community? Because we need the love and we don't need the shame. You know, sometimes we take the hate to educate, but it's now important that you take this education and take it beyond this room, because everybody who's in the room today, you were ready to do the work. Everybody outside of that room, I question how much are they really ready to do the work? And you have to remind them that they have to be a part of this work for all of us. So I think, for one, I imagine that when you have this conversation with the trans person who expressed to you, excuse me, that they've experienced sexual assault, I think that I'm not sure how the university prioritizes each case, but I think that what I've seen, at least in my own experience with it, is that we don't get the same level of outrage or interest in pursuing justice for our cases. And what I mean by that is that, you know, my own personal experience was like with a social worker actually. And I was raped and taken off the streets and all of this craziness. And I remember when my social worker showed up, right? She asked questions that I didn't know to ask, right? Because I'm a trans identified person. And she said, did you receive a rape kit? Or, you know, how did they report you? You know, how did they report the incident? And just having her sense of concern and right and wanting to hold not only the police accountable but to ensure that I got the same due process was something that was super helpful for me in the end. Because my interaction with the police, I was told that, right, like because I was a trans woman, there was no way that I got raped, right? That I couldn't have experienced what a woman experienced because I don't have the same parts as a cisgender woman, an anatomical female. And so I think for me, that reassurance, right, that I deserve the same process for one. And then I think it was about listening mostly. I think everybody wanted to tell me who I was in that moment and how, the statistics around it, right? Like, this is an issue that affects so many other people in your position. And it was like, but what about me? How do you help me feel humanized in this situation where I'm experiencing so much trauma and anxiety? Is by telling me that even in the event where there may not be justice, know that I am your justice. I am your advocate. I am the person that believes you. I think because I believe so many trans people always have to experience a world that questions their gender, that questions who they are. And so you have a little bit of self-doubt about even what you went through and how real was it of a, sexual assault experience for a woman. And I think that if you can help support them in that moment of insecurity by saying, no, you are a woman and this was wrong and this is what supporting you looks like, and including them in any space that is meant to help heal women. And if they don't identify as a woman, then what does it look like to create a space for them to be able to exist within community of people who've had other experiences like them? Because everything is put into so many different categories that, it's, when do you even know that it's your space? How do I know that this is my safe space? How do I know that I'm a part of this conversation? And if the university is doing that, then I commend you. But what I know is we all could always be doing more to elevate what our representation looks like. And so even on staff, have you explored having somebody trans identified, even if they are the middle person as a coordinator? Do they see themselves when they're coming to report these incidents? Do they have a sense of community to help them navigate that trauma? And if that is something that isn't present, then I would challenge you into finding people within community that can help build that out, because I think it's so important for trans people to see themselves in the spaces in which they pursue their services that would help them begin to heal from such traumatic events like sexual assault. I think, for me, I'm angry about a lot, but I would say I try not to be full of so much anger in the sense of expecting others to understand my journey and the entirety of it. So when you've had the ability to just be yourself or to just live in the world and not have to question so much about yourself, of how are you presenting yourself in the world? How will you be received? Of course you wouldn't have anger in you. And I think if I'm going to be more frank, I usually say the people who are telling you not to be angry don't understand your reality. They don't understand the level of courage that it took for you to walk outside of your door with the fear of losing your life. Right? So while they're just existing, there's a subconscious thought of saying like, oh, is this where I die? And that can feel frustrating at times. That can make you think that there is nobody really within community that is genuinely for you. But I think what I've learned is that life is better when you learn to just live it for you. And I have this saying I think I live by, which is, I'm not here to be understood by everybody. The greatest understanding I'll ever have is the one that I seek for myself. And who's to say I'll keep all my screws and bolts together by the time I get old enough to remember those things? So nothing is truly promised, but what you can control is the moments in which you create your own happiness. And so, if you are misunderstood, also understand where they may be coming from too. They've never had to navigate what you've had to navigate through. So they don't understand why you're angry. And I'm sorry, if a person of color, because this is February, so I'm keeping it so real, okay? When a person of color say you angry, I might say, are you projecting? When a white person say you angry, I'm asking, how racist are you? Now, some people say, well, that's not fair. What if I'm just asking the same question? I don't know. For some reason, when white people love a good label that you angry, But then they could see that somebody that looks just like them perform the same behaviors, and it's just she's frustrated. She don't get the angry label. She's just frustrated. She doesn't have enough emotional intelligence. So it's like, remember your crowd too, right? And what is it rooted in? So if you know that this person's proximity to whiteness may make them sometimes center their perception or views of the world through a little bit of racism, meet them where they're at and give them the light and the love that they say that you don't have within you. Give them the grace they didn't give you, and then create your distance, because that is going to harm and hurt you more than anything. If you are trying to learn how to exist around somebody else who says you're angry all the time, right? Find your joy, be your own joy, and let those people who think you're angry, let them deal with it and process it by themselves. You already got too much being trans, okay? Then I have to take on why somebody else think you angry. But don't let what everybody in society thinks of you be the reason why you show up angry all the time either. Give them not what they expect. So give them that joy. Give them that respect that they couldn't give you. Because that's where real joy starts to begin, when you can accept what other people don't and find peace in that. So I think my first thing would be is that historically men of color and women of color have been policed in ways that our counterparts haven't. So I think that a lot of it is rooted in a culture that has been taught, right? That anything outside of the most palatable Black, which is usually the biracial Black person or the one who's the closest to whiteness, is seen as the one who's deserving of being celebrated and invited into certain spaces, whether it be corporate spaces or suburban communities, and accepted. But then when we start to fall into what some would say is the stereotypical Black, right? I think that for me, I've always understood that this person has not experienced enough liberation to understand the impact of their words, and that their level of frustration is not rooted in my transness, but in a history in which didn't allow them to show up the way that I am, which is being an unapologetic Black person. We are taught as people of color that we can't use certain vernacular, right? Or, we can't use certain, I'm trying to make sure I'm mindful too that there's white people in this space, that we can't have certain body language without it being perceived as threatening. And I think that while that can of course go into code switching, and but English is English and grammatical English is important, but culturally, right, we weren't always given the access to quality education. And the people in which who were teaching us didn't want to really teach us about our own history, but a version of the history in which didn't make them be perceived as part of the problem, right? And so what you have is a community who's all fighting to get out of oppression, fighting to get out of poverty. And the only way to do that historically has been conform and articulate, right? In a way that invites us in. And the moment we're invited in, nobody in this family better threaten that, right? And that extends from whether it's cousins to immediate children to our parents or guardians or whomever, because anything that steps outside of most palatable Black is a threat to the stability of whatever we perceive as being Afro-elitist or a part of privilege. And so I think I've always had to understand is that my problem, whether it's within the Black community, it's within the white community, it's rooted in a history that hasn't allowed people to heal. And I think on both sides. I think that, and I'm not saying there's fine people on both sides, because we know that ain't true. But what I know is that there are now good people on both sides. Historically, that hasn't always been the case. So now what are we doing to use in this moment, right? That doesn't feel like it's a part of, a certain level of wokeness, performativeness, right? That says like, I see this person and this person's history and how that history prevented them from just being able to show up. So when they're projecting onto me that my Black transness is an abomination or it's too much, no, you're still operating from that place in which your grandmother had to teach you. right? Is that a Black man, like I said in the film, that a Black man should be this way and a Black woman should be that way. And anything outside of that, we're going to say it's taboo because we've never really wanted to acknowledge it. We always knew it was there. We might have even known that we partaked in it. But to now bring it a part of something within community that has visibility, oh, that's too much. Now we are already Black. What are, like, I don't know how many people of color in the room, but how many times have we heard we are already Black? And now you want to go out there and say you gay too, or you trans, you know? And so somehow they think that our identity created more of a problem for them, right? But we're the ones navigating through the adversities. And so what I've learned is that even whether it's in my own family or it's with counterparts, to learn what trans means is to understand that we are not a monolith and that we don't look the same, we don't all act the same. But what I know is that in Black culture, there's some things that we can say is the same. There's certain things that culturally are passed down, you know, and when I know that my only form of liberation is within whiteness, then that's my problem. That's my responsibility to call it out. Because I should not expect white to liberate me when I am fighting the same fight with you and I'm Black. So are we both fighting for liberation and demanding our counterparts to create equity and justice around our experiences? Or am I just expecting my counterpart? And so I've learned, no, call your people out in a loving way. Invite white people in because they hold the equity. And then when you have the person of color who you've called out, they understand their role in the problem. Now the white person is the role of equity. Now, how can you help me sustain whatever it is I'm building out, whether it's teaching new language or providing services, or how can you join that fight with me? And to the Black person who refused to see me, you know, all I can tell you is it's February. I love you either way, but really get your shit together. Because like I said in the movie, whether you see me as a man in a wig or a tranny or whatever, at the end of the day, they see me as a nigga just like you. And I mean with a hard R and not a GA. So if you think you got something that is an advantage over me, you forget the real problem here. We're fighting institutional racism, a history of racism that never included any of us, no matter how we went to bed. So it is your responsibility to invite in, call out, but most importantly, build the community, be the community, and stop waiting for somebody to come save your community. So I think, to not go on a tangent, but to kind of get straight to the point. So unfortunately, I have to share with everyone that my healing had to look like letting go of the relationship with my mother for more reasons than one, but it actually started at the beginning of this KOKOMO City journey. I think that what I know about that statement, that it was very true, that I had to understand, how I was showing up in her life, right? And so to give a little bit more context, the story would be is that my mother had over 6 children. I was a part of the first group of children, so one of her oldest. And because of my survival work and the work that I was doing, I was always showing up for my family. No matter the circumstance, I was there. But then it started to make me question, how was I showing up? Was the Black woman in me showing up the same way they expected me to show up for them? Or was the Black man in me carrying guilt for not being that in their life anymore? And there's this expectation of men to provide for women. And so, when I had this conversation with my mother, I just started to think about her history. And I let go of all the history that I felt like she was a part of creating for me, right? Like, let's take away from the sexual assault. Let's take away foster care. Let's take away survival work. Who was she before I came into this world? This was an abandoned Black woman. This was a Black woman who literally was navigating through the crack epidemic. This was a woman who didn't have a family that had the most wealth and prestige to give her the best quality life. And here I am, another Black man, telling her, I'm leaving your life again. And I'm leaving on my terms. And when I do return, oh, I won't be the man you expected. I'm going to be just as vulnerable as you. I had to remember that my mother deserved that understanding, because as long as she expected a son to return, as long as she expected a son to provide, I wasn't acknowledging her pain. Because what I know is 10 years later, whether Princetta wanted it or not, I wasn't returning to the person she wanted. I wasn't going to be Darrell for her because it was convenient for her emotions. So how do we process this together? How do I let go of being Darrell with you? Because when I accepted it, I did it on my own. I knew how to move past that, right? I knew, because my truth is not Darrell, my truth is Daniella. And so it was, how do you show up for this lady who has been hurt, who has been, pushed out of her own home to some extent and experienced sexual assault by Black men? How are you not that? And it has to look like sitting down with her and telling her, I'm sorry about all the men who hurt you, but I'm not that man who hurt you. So can you see your daughter? Can you love me enough to be your daughter? And if that's something that you can't offer me, then I have to start loving myself. And loving myself means that I won't be in a relationship with you. And oh, trust me, I was raised religious. So honor thy mother and thy father, or thy days shall be numbered, and all that good jazz. I've never let go of my spirituality, but I know that, if who I believe, which is God and my higher power, is taking me to my destiny. Unfortunately, I don't think that he said that my mother would be a part of that for me. But I wasn't going to walk away like the other Black man. I was going to process and heal with her like the way other Black men couldn't.